Greetings, Sentinels! This is Universe Unique, and today, the truth comes to light. You know when a suit is supposed to be a symbol of mystery, power, and transformation, but ends up becoming a joke? That's exactly what's happening. It's time to say it plainly. There are black Spider-Man suits that are simply indefensible. And what makes it worse? Some people still try to act like they're dark and edgy, when in reality, they look more like secondhand cosplay. But hold on, because between the embarrassing failures and the epic successes, there is a visual logic that almost no one notices. And I'm going to show it to you. If you enjoy diving into this kind of analysis that doesn't gloss over bad adaptations, and at the same time values it when the legacy is respected, then this channel was made for you. We're about to reach an important milestone here, and your support through subscribing is what keeps this universe alive. Every new subscriber is another piece added to this geek puzzle, and when you join, you get direct access to in-depth scripts, visual secrets, and interpretations most channels simply ignore. Tell me in the comments, which city and country are you watching this video from? I truly want to know where each sentinel following this parallel timeline is coming from. And yes, I read all the comments. If this content is connecting you with the truths of the multiverse, leave a like and join our secret subscriber line. Now then, the first fall in this timeline begins with a visual aberration that should never have moved beyond the concept phase. But there is a detail in this version that reveals a much bigger problem within the adaptations, and I will return to it shortly. It is almost unbelievable what they have done with some of the symbiote suits in more recent adaptations. The most striking, and also the most unfortunate, comes directly from the Spider-Man 2017 animated series. Yes, the so-called synthetic suit. Calling that a symbiote is an insult to the very original concept. The idea was to present a technological variation of the black suit, but the result was a visual Frankenstein with a greenish tone, generic details, and a design far from any sense of threat or symbolic identity. It is simply embarrassing. And the most curious part? This visual aberration was followed by another mistake in the same universe. The second black suit in the series, now with a real symbiote, also fails completely. It comes with a white logo that looks more like it was borrowed from Mac Gargan, the villain who took on the Venom mantle for a time in the comics. But here, that logo is placed on Peter Parker's chest. No context, no meaning, and worse, no style. The lack of shadowing combined with the excess of poorly placed black lines turns the design into a shapeless blur. These two visual mistakes raise a bigger question. Why do modern adaptations struggle so much to understand the original concept of the black suit? In the classic canon, the symbiote was meant to be discreet. It did not want to draw attention. It imitated the structure of Peter's traditional suit, simply reversing the color. Absolute black, clean white symbol, and nothing else. That was all, and it worked precisely because of that. But when creators try to reinvent too much, they end up distorting the essence. And here's the irony. By trying to do something new and bold, they deliver exactly the opposite of what the suit should be. Because if there's one thing the black suit shouldn't be, it's flashy. But hold on to this next one, because there's a suit that even looks modern and well made, until you realize what it visually conveys. And then everything falls apart. Let me show you. It's time to talk about one of the most beloved suits by nostalgic memory, but which, when analyzed up close, doesn't hold up to the pedestal many put it on. The black suit from the movie Spider-Man 3, by Sam Raimi, is not exactly the symbiote suit we know from the comics. And that's the central point. It wasn't born to be faithful to the original material, but to be an extension of Tobey Maguire's traditional uniform, just dyed black with slight alterations in the finish. In the comics, since its debut in Secret Wars No. 8, 1984, the black suit has always been marked by minimalism, absence of webs on the fabric, an intense white on the spider symbol, and a design that communicated power without needing an excess of details. In the movie version, Raimi kept the raised webbing, the same stitching pattern, and didn't introduce the white symbol. The result was a uniform that, although elegant within the trilogy's aesthetic, did not convey the same idea of silent infiltration that the original suit carried. There were rumors at the time that the initial visual concept, was closer to the comic book, but it would have been discarded for looking too much like neoprene suits used for diving. True or not, the final decision sacrificed an essential element: the iconic visual contrast that helped differentiate the symbiote suit from the classic suit immediately. And here comes an important narrative detail. In the comic book, the change to black was not just aesthetic, but a direct reflection of Peter Parker's transformation. The suit made him more aggressive, colder. In the movie, this reading was largely lost because visually we were still seeing the same Spider-Man as always, just with a different color palette. But if this version relied on subtlety to the point of losing impact, the next one went in the opposite direction and ended up exaggerating too much in visual aggressiveness. And that's where the original essence begins to distort in another way. In the game Marvel's Spider-Man 2, by Insomniac, the symbiote suit received a visual treatment full of movement, texture, and constant mutation. The idea was to represent the symbiote as a living entity, always changing, reacting to Peter's emotional state. In practice, this resulted in a more aggressive visual, with subtle tentacles, moving fragments, and a spider symbol that distorts throughout the narrative. The problem is that this kind of approach, although it works to communicate the character's progressive corruption, strays far from the original logic of the suit. In the classic canon, especially in the Amazing Spider-Man phase of the 80s, the symbiote didn't need to display its power explicitly. It was sleek, uniform, almost silent. The threat was in Peter's behavior, not in the visual spectacle that the suit offered. Furthermore, the excess of lines and segmentations in the design breaks the impact of absolute black. There are areas with different textures, parts that look like armor, and a fragmentation that resembles more combat armor than the original organic suit. It is a striking contrast when compared, for example, to the approach of Spectacular Spider-Man, where the visual remained clean, and the change came in the hero's expression and posture. This choice by Insomniac may even be justified by the context of the game, as the proposal is to show Peter's escalation of aggression and instability. However, when we look at the suit as an isolated design piece, it loses its original narrative functionality, to be an elegant disguise that infiltrates without drawing attention. And here comes an interesting point. The next suit on our list maintains simplicity and visual power, but stumbles on something that seems small at first glance, but compromises the entire perception of fidelity. I'll show you why. In the game Spider-Man, Web of Shadows, the symbiote suit presents a visual balance that pleases at first sight. It maintains the classic design with a highlighted white symbol and proportions faithful to the comics, immediately conveying the feeling of a dominant Peter Parker, possessed by the symbiote. However, there is one detail that breaks the harmony: the choice of the base color. Instead of the deep black that marks the essence of the suit, the hue leans towards a bluish-gray tone, something close to periwinkle. In the comics of the 80s and 90s, it was common to use blue as a shading resource to suggest shine over black, but this was a technical limitation of printing. In the game, this color is constant and homogeneous, which alters the perception of the suit. It ceases to be a shadowy figure and becomes more flashy, almost metallic, diverging from the idea of discretion that defines the original symbiote. Still, the overall design of Web of Shadows respects the proportion and simplicity of the classic suit, avoiding excess texture or segmentation. This puts it far ahead of other adaptations that tried to reinvent the concept to the point of mischaracterizing it. Here, the problem is not in the design or narrative, but in a chromatic choice that may alienate more purist fans. This decision shows how a seemingly small detail, the saturation of a color, can alter the entire visual subtext of a character. And that's precisely why, in the next examples, we will see adaptations that understood this importance and reached such a high level of fidelity that it becomes difficult to choose a clear winner. But there is one that stands out for combining aesthetics and narrative in an impeccable way. From here, we enter the gallery of adaptations that truly understood the spirit of the symbiote costume. We are talking about visuals that preserve minimalism, respect the proportions of the symbol, and keep black as the dominant element, without chromatic distractions or texture excesses. This is the case of the Ultimate Spider-Man costume in Shattered Dimensions, the uniform in Spectacular Spider-Man, the design in Spider-Man Unlimited, and even more unusual representations, such as the Lego version or the one from Fortnite. What unites all these interpretations is the clarity of purpose. Understanding that the black suit works precisely because it doesn't try to visually prove anything. It is clean, direct, and intimidating in the right measure. The contrast between absolute black and the white symbol serves as a visual signature, and any significant variation in this formula needs to have a clear narrative reason to work. In the Ultimate Spider-Man from Shattered Dimensions, for example, there is an intelligent use of shading and light textures that preserve the comic book look even in a 3D environment. In Spectacular Spider-Man, the design follows the narrative, changing as the symbiote corrupts Peter, without ever losing the base of the original concept. And in Spider-Man Unlimited, the difference lies in the elongation of the symbol, but still within a coherent logic with the series' style. Even in more stylized media, such as Lego or Fortnite, the fidelity to the comic book design is absolute. These versions show that it is not necessary to completely reinvent the costume to adapt it to different settings. Visual elements. On the contrary, following the essence ensures instant recognition and respect from the audience. However, even among these successes, there is one that manages to stand out, not only for its impeccable visual, but because the design and narrative walk together so precisely that they elevate the suit to a unique level. And that's what we're going to talk about now. Among all the adaptations that keep the symbiote suit at a high level, Spectacular Spider-Man's stands out as the perfect synthesis between aesthetics and narrative. The series understood that the suit is not just a piece of clothing, but a direct reflection of Peter Parker's psychological state. Therefore, the visual starts faithful to the classic design, deep black, clean white symbol, and evolves organically as the symbiote influences the hero's behavior. This transition is subtle at first, with small texture and shine alterations, until it becomes more noticeable, with changes in the symbol's shape and the overall tone of the suit. This approach creates a powerful narrative effect. The audience sees the corruption happening before their eyes, not only through Peter's actions, but also through the suit that carries the mark of this transformation. It is a decision that directly dialogues with what we have seen in the comics, but with an extra layer of visual progression that few adaptations have dared to explore. Another point that elevates this version is the coherence with the tone of the series. Spectacular Spider-Man has always balanced fidelity to the original material with mode-intelligent modernization, and the symbiote suit follows this logic. There are no gratuitous elements, no excess texture, no temptation to show too much. Everything is calculated to reinforce the narrative that the suit is a living presence, but that at first glance could still go unnoticed by those who do not know its true nature. This combination of respect for the essence, visual progression, and narrative relevance makes the Spectacular Spider-Man suit not only one of the best ever adapted, but for many fans, the definitive one. And if it reigns at the top, the question that remains is, which of these versions truly represents for you the true Spider-Man under the symbiote's control? In the end, Spider-Man's black suit is not just an aesthetic variation. It carries a symbolic weight. It's about transformation, about the thin line between control and loss, and about how the right look can reinforce or dilute that narrative. Some adaptations understood this exemplarily, while others got lost trying to innovate where there was no need. The contrast is clear. While certain versions are remembered for their fidelity and impact, others are quickly forgotten because they failed to connect with either the essence of the character or the audience. The key point is that the symbiote suit works best when it respects the balance between simplicity and meaning. Absolute black, striking white symbol, absence of excesses. It's not just about looking good on screen, but to visually communicate Peter Parker's duality. When this is maintained, the style of the media, animation, live action, game, or even Lego, doesn't matter. The result remains powerful and recognizable. Now, the decision on which is the best of all is inevitably personal. For some, the spectacular Spider-Man version is unbeatable. For others, the minimalism of the original comics, or the boldness of Web of Shadows, still define the pinnacle. But whatever your choice, it reveals something about what you value in the character: fidelity to the origin, visual impact, or narrative coherence. If you want to continue exploring these details that most people overlook, subscribe to the channel. We are very close to reaching an important goal, and each subscription strengthens this community of sentinels who seek to look beyond the surface. By joining, you will receive more in-depth analysis, comparisons with comics, and visual interpretations that simply do not appear in the common coverage. And before I finish, tell me in the comments, which city or country are you watching this video from? It's always interesting to see where each sentinel is following this forbidden timeline from. Den tu bet nanawin.